Picture this. A massive fortress sits atop a windswept hill in Jerusalem, its stone walls bearing the scars of countless battles. The year is 1118. 9 French knights kneel before the Patriarch of Jerusalem, their hands clasped in prayer, their faces etched with determination. They swear a sacred oath to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. But what if everything you've been told about their mission was a carefully crafted lie? What if these 9 men, who would become the most powerful military order in medieval Europe, weren't really there to guard dusty roads and escort merchants? What if their true purpose was so dangerous, so earth-shattering, that the Vatican has spent nearly 1,000 years burying every trace of it? You're about to discover a secret that reaches into the darkest corners of the Vatican's archives, where forbidden documents gather dust behind locked doors. A secret that could rewrite everything you thought you knew about Christianity, about power, and about the very foundations of faith itself. This isn't just another conspiracy theory about hidden treasure or lost artifacts. This is something far more explosive. The Knights Templar didn't just disappear into history. They left behind clues, codes, and a trail of evidence that leads directly to the Vatican's most guarded vaults. And what's hidden there isn't gold or silver or precious stones. It's knowledge. Knowledge so powerful that popes have died protecting it, and others have killed to possess it. But before we dive into the depths of this mystery, you need to understand something crucial. This story isn't just about the past. It's about right now, today, this very moment. Because somewhere in the shadows of modern Rome, the keepers of this ancient secret are still watching, still protecting, still hiding the truth that could shake the very pillars of the Catholic Church. So settle in, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you've been taught about one of history's most enigmatic organizations. We're going to follow a thread that stretches from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem to the deepest vaults beneath St. Peter's Basilica. And along the way, we'll uncover evidence that the Vatican has been desperately trying to suppress for centuries. Let me start with something that should make your skin crawl. In 1307, on a Friday the 13th, King Philip IV of France ordered the simultaneous arrest of every Knight Templar in his kingdom. Thousands of these warrior monks were seized at dawn, dragged from their beds, and thrown into dungeons. The charges were shocking: heresy, blasphemy, worshipping false idols, engaging in unspeakable rituals. But here's what's truly terrifying about that day. When the king's soldiers stormed the Templar headquarters in Paris, they expected to find vast treasures. The Templars were known to be incredibly wealthy, with gold flowing in from across Europe and the Holy Land. They had invented banking as we know it. They owned ships, castles, entire cities. They were richer than most kings. Yet when those heavy doors swung open, the vaults were empty, completely, impossibly empty. Not a single coin, not a single document, not a trace of the immense wealth that should have been there. How does an organization that wealthy simply make everything vanish overnight? The answer lies in what happened months before that fateful Friday. Someone warned them. Someone with access to the highest levels of power in both the French court and the papal hierarchy. Someone who knew that the arrests were coming and gave the Templars time to move their most precious possessions to safety. But they didn't just move gold and silver. They moved something far more valuable. Something that, if discovered, would have meant not just the death of individual Templars, but the complete destruction of the Catholic Church itself. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like the plot of a Hollywood movie. Secret societies, hidden treasures, Vatican conspiracies. But I need you to understand something. The evidence for what I'm about to tell you isn't buried in dusty novels or internet forums. It's sitting right there in the historical record, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to connect the dots. Let's start with the Templars themselves. These weren't just any group of knights. From the very beginning, they were different. Strange, operating by rules that made no sense for a military order. For nearly 2 decades after their founding, they recruited no new members. 9 men guarding the roads of the Holy Land. It's absurd. You couldn't effectively patrol a single city with 9 men, let alone protect pilgrims across hundreds of miles of dangerous territory. So what were they really doing during those first 20 years? Here's where the story takes its first dark turn. They weren't guarding roads. They were digging, excavating, searching through the ruins beneath the Temple Mount, where King Solomon's temple once stood. For 20 years, these 9 men spent their days underground, tunneling through ancient foundations, following maps and clues that led them deeper and deeper into the earth. What were they looking for? The official story says they were seeking the Ark of the Covenant, or perhaps the Holy Grail, or some other biblical relic that would legitimize their mission and attract donations. But the truth is far more disturbing than any lost artifact. They found documents, scrolls, records that had been hidden for centuries, waiting in the darkness beneath Jerusalem. Documents that told a very different story about the origins of Christianity, about Jesus Christ himself, about the early church and the men who shaped it into the institution we know today. These weren't just historical curiosities. They were explosive revelations that could destroy the very foundations of papal authority. Think about it. What would happen if the world discovered that the official story of Christ's life, death, and resurrection had been deliberately altered? What if there was proof that the apostolic succession, the direct line of authority from Jesus to the popes, was based on a lie? The Templars found that proof, and once they possessed it, they became the most dangerous men in Christendom. Not because of their military might, but because of what they knew. They held the power to topple kings and popes alike. They could rewrite the entire history of Western civilization with the stroke of a pen, but they didn't use this power immediately. Instead, they did something far more cunning. They began to build, not just castles and churches, but a network. A shadow organization that stretched across Europe and beyond. They established banks, trading routes, and communication systems that allowed them to move information and resources with unprecedented speed and secrecy. And at the heart of this network was their most carefully guarded secret. The documents they had discovered beneath the Temple Mount weren't just stored in some hidden vault. They were copied, translated, and distributed among trusted allies throughout their organization. Multiple copies, hidden in multiple locations, each one a potential doomsday weapon against the established church. This is where the Vatican enters our story in a very personal way. Because by the late 13th century, the popes weren't just aware of what the Templars possessed, they were terrified of it. The papal archives from this period, the few documents that haven't been mysteriously lost or destroyed, tell a story of increasing desperation. Secret meetings, hushed conferences behind closed doors, plans being made to deal with what they called the Templar problem. But here's the truly chilling part. The church didn't just want to destroy the Templars. They wanted what the Templars had found. Those documents beneath the Temple Mount weren't just dangerous because they could expose the church's lies. They were valuable because they contained the real truth about Christianity's origins. Truth that could be controlled, managed, and used to strengthen papal power rather than destroy it. So began one of history's most elaborate cover-ups, a conspiracy that would span centuries and involve some of the most powerful figures in European history. And at its center, hidden deep within the Vatican's most secret archives, lie the documents that started it all. The plan they devised was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. Pope Clement V and King Philip IV didn't just want to arrest the Templars. They wanted to stage the most elaborate theft in human history. While the world watched knights being dragged to torture chambers and burned at stakes, a small group of papal agents would infiltrate Templar strongholds across Europe, searching for the one thing that mattered more than all their gold combined. But the Templars were already 3 steps ahead. You see, their network wasn't just about moving money or goods. It was an intelligence operation that would make modern spy agencies jealous. They had informants in royal courts, contacts in merchant guilds, and most importantly, allies within the church itself. When whispers of the coming arrests reached their ears, they didn't just hide their treasure. They executed a plan that had been decades in the making. Picture this scene. It's a moonless night in October 1307, just weeks before the mass arrests. A small fleet of Templar ships slips quietly out of the port of La Rochelle on France's Atlantic coast. No fanfare, no official departure records, no customs inspections. These vessels simply vanish into the darkness, carrying with them something far more precious than the gold and silver everyone assumes they're smuggling to safety. But here's where the story gets truly extraordinary. These ships didn't sail to England or Scotland or any of the obvious safe havens you might expect. They headed west, across the treacherous Atlantic, following navigation charts and maps that shouldn't have existed for another century. Maps that showed land masses and ocean currents that European explorers supposedly wouldn't discover until Columbus made his famous voyage. How did 13th century knights possess such advanced geographical knowledge? The answer lies in those documents from beneath the Temple Mount. Because what the Templars discovered in Jerusalem wasn't just religious texts or historical records. They found ancient maps, navigation charts, and astronomical calculations that revealed the true scope of human exploration thousands of years before the official historical timeline. These weren't just random artifacts. They were part of a vast library of suppressed knowledge that had been hidden away because it contradicted everything the medieval world believed about geography, astronomy, and human history. Knowledge that proved ancient civilizations had achieved levels of sophistication that the church insisted was impossible. And now, suddenly, everything starts to make sense. The Templars' incredible wealth wasn't just from European banking and Holy Land trading. They were using ancient knowledge to establish trade routes and mining operations in lands that officially didn't exist. They were literally operating centuries ahead of their time, guided by wisdom that the church had spent generations trying to bury, but the Vatican's agents were relentless. Even as Templar ships disappeared into the Atlantic, papal investigators were scouring every known Templar property across Europe. They tortured captured knights, not just for confessions of heresy, but for information about where the most sensitive documents had been hidden. They followed every lead, chased every rumor, and slowly began to piece together the scope of what they were dealing with. What they discovered must have sent shockwaves through the highest levels of the church hierarchy. The Templars hadn't just found documents that challenged Christian doctrine. They had uncovered evidence of a systematic campaign by early church leaders to suppress and destroy vast amounts of human knowledge. Texts about medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy that had been deliberately eliminated because they threatened church authority. Imagine being a medieval pope and suddenly learning that your predecessors had spent centuries burning libraries, assassinating scholars, and rewriting history books to maintain their grip on power. Imagine discovering that the Dark Ages weren't a natural result of barbarian invasions, but a carefully orchestrated campaign to keep humanity ignorant and dependent on church guidance. This is the secret that the Vatican has been protecting for 700 years. Not just the specific documents the Templars found, but the horrifying truth about the Church's role in suppressing human knowledge and progress for over a millennium. And the evidence is still there, hidden in plain sight throughout the Vatican's archives. Catalogues that list thousands of texts as destroyed or lost, but with suspiciously vague explanations for how such massive collections simply vanished. Papal bulls that reference the need to protect divine mysteries from those who lack proper understanding. Correspondence between church officials about the dangers of allowing certain knowledge to spread among the common people. But here's what should truly terrify you about this conspiracy. It didn't end with the destruction of the Templars. That was just the beginning. Because once the Church realized the scope of knowledge that had been hidden from them, they became obsessed with finding and controlling every last fragment of it. They established what we might call history's first intelligence agency, a network of scholars, monks, and agents whose sole purpose was to track down and acquire any texts, artifacts, or knowledge that might threaten church doctrine. They infiltrated universities, funded archaeological expeditions, and even established entire religious orders dedicated to this shadow mission. And they're still out there today, still searching, still suppressing. Because the Templars didn't just hide their discoveries in some medieval vault that was lost to time. They created a system for preserving and transmitting this knowledge across generations, a system so sophisticated that it's still operating in the modern world. The truth is scattered across dozens of locations, hidden within symbols and codes that most people walk past every day without realizing their significance. Ancient knowledge disguised as architectural decoration, historical facts encoded in seemingly innocent artwork, scientific discoveries preserved in the margins of religious texts. The Vatican knows this. They've spent centuries trying to track down every last fragment, but the Templars were too clever. They built redundancy into their system, multiple copies of everything, hidden by different methods in different places. Even if the Church found 90% of what they were looking for, that last 10% would be enough to expose the entire conspiracy. And that's why, even today, Vatican agents continue their ancient mission. They monitor archaeological discoveries, fund historical research, and carefully manage access to certain archives and collections, not to suppress knowledge entirely, but to control how it's revealed, ensuring that any earth-shattering discoveries are presented in ways that don't threaten the Church's fundamental authority. But the Templars' greatest masterstroke wasn't hiding their discoveries from the Vatican. It was ensuring that someone, somewhere, would always be watching the Watchers. They established what historians have come to call the Shadow Guardians. These weren't knights in shining armor or monks chanting in monasteries. They were ordinary people, scattered across Europe and beyond, each carrying a small piece of the larger puzzle. Merchants who memorized specific number sequences, stonemasons who carved particular symbols into cathedral walls, artists who embedded coded messages into their paintings. But here's what makes this system truly brilliant. None of these guardians knew the complete truth. Each person only possessed one fragment, one clue, one piece of a massive jigsaw puzzle that would take generations to assemble. A baker in southern France might know a specific date. A blacksmith in northern England might remember a particular symbol. A seamstress in Rome itself might stitch a coded pattern into church vestments. The Vatican's agents could torture individual Templars, raid their strongholds, and burn their libraries, but they couldn't possibly identify and eliminate every ordinary person who carried a fragment of the secret. It was the perfect insurance policy against complete suppression, and it worked. For 7 centuries, these fragments have been passed down through bloodlines, guild traditions, and secret societies, each generation adding their own layer of protection, their own methods of preservation. What started as a desperate attempt to save forbidden knowledge became a living, breathing network that adapted and evolved with each passing century. Consider the mystery of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. Built in the 15th century by William Sinclair, this extraordinary structure contains carved symbols that shouldn't exist. Plants from the Americas, depicted in stone decades before Columbus supposedly discovered the New World. Mathematical equations that wouldn't be formally recognized until the Renaissance. Astronomical alignments that demonstrate knowledge of celestial mechanics that medieval scholars allegedly didn't possess. The traditional explanation is that these are merely decorative elements, perhaps inspired by travelers' tales or artistic imagination. But when you understand the Templar connection, when you realize that the Sinclair family provided sanctuary to fleeing Templar knights, the truth becomes obvious. Rosslyn Chapel isn't just a church, it's a library. A three-dimensional encyclopedia of suppressed knowledge, preserved in stone for future generations to decode. And it's not the only one. Across Europe, seemingly innocent buildings contain similar anomalies. Gothic cathedrals with mathematical proportions that encode advanced geometric principles. Castle walls, decorated with symbols that appear random, but follow precise patterns. Even simple farmhouse foundations laid out according to astronomical calculations that peasants supposedly couldn't understand. The Vatican knows about these sites. Their agents have been cataloguing and studying them for centuries, trying to decode the messages hidden within their walls. But the Templars were too clever. They didn't just hide their knowledge in one location or one format. They distributed it across hundreds of sites, using dozens of different encoding methods, creating a puzzle so complex that solving it requires resources and expertise that no single organization possesses. But technology is changing the game. Modern computers can analyze patterns, cross-reference symbols, and identify connections that human researchers might miss. Satellite imagery reveals geographical alignments that were invisible to earlier investigators. Digital databases allow scholars to compare artifacts and documents from around the world, looking for hidden relationships and recurring themes. And the Vatican is terrified, because for the first time in 700 years, the tools exist to solve the Templar puzzle completely, to assemble all those scattered fragments into a coherent picture of what really lies hidden in their deepest archives. That's why, in recent decades, the Church has dramatically increased its efforts to control historical research and archaeological discovery. They fund expeditions to ensure they get first access to any significant finds. They establish partnerships with universities and museums, giving them influence over how discoveries are interpreted and presented to the public. They even maintain their own teams of researchers, working around the clock to stay ahead of independent investigators. But they're fighting a losing battle. Information wants to be free, and the digital age has made it almost impossible to completely suppress knowledge. Every year, new discoveries emerge. Ancient texts are digitized and made available online. Archaeological sites are mapped and studied by international teams. Historical documents are analyzed using techniques that reveal hidden layers of meaning. The scattered pieces of the Templar secret are slowly coming together, and what's emerging is more shocking than even the most paranoid conspiracy theorists imagined. Because the documents hidden beneath the Temple Mount didn't just challenge specific Christian doctrines. They revealed that virtually everything we think we know about ancient history has been deliberately distorted. The rise and fall of civilizations, the development of human technology, the spread of religious beliefs, the very timeline of human progress, all of it carefully manipulated to support a narrative that keeps ordinary people ignorant and dependent on institutional authority. Imagine discovering that advanced civilizations existed thousands of years before the official historical record begins. That ancient peoples possessed technologies we're only now beginning to understand. That global trade networks and communication systems operated across continents when we thought humans were still living in isolated tribes. This isn't science fiction or New Age mysticism. It's documented fact, preserved in texts and artifacts that the Church has been hiding for over a millennium. Evidence that proves human civilization is far older, far more sophisticated, and far more interconnected than we've been taught. And here's the truly terrifying part. The Vatican doesn't just want to keep this knowledge secret, they want to use it. Because these ancient texts don't just contain historical information, they include practical knowledge, advanced medical techniques, sophisticated engineering principles, even technologies that we haven't fully developed in the modern world. For centuries, the Church has been selectively releasing fragments of this knowledge, always claiming divine inspiration or natural discovery, breakthrough medical treatments that save papal lives, architectural innovations that make Vatican buildings more impressive, even military technologies that helped Catholic armies defeat their enemies. They've been playing a game that spans millennia, doling out suppressed knowledge in carefully controlled doses, always ensuring that they maintain their position as humanity's essential intermediary between ignorance and enlightenment. But the Templars saw this coming. They understood that knowledge is power, and power corrupts even the most well-intentioned institutions. That's why they didn't just hide their discoveries from the Vatican. They created a system designed to eventually make all suppressed knowledge freely available to humanity, a time-release mechanism, if you will. Hidden clues that would become solvable only when human technology advanced to a certain point. Encoded messages that could only be decoded when people possessed the mathematical and computational tools necessary to understand their implications. The Templars were playing a longer game than anyone realized. They weren't just trying to preserve forbidden knowledge for some future generation. They were waiting for humanity to evolve to a point where that knowledge could be safely released without causing societal collapse. And that time is now. We're living through the moment the Templars planned for 7 centuries ago. The moment when their carefully planted seeds would finally bear fruit, and the truth they died protecting would emerge into the light. The question is whether the Vatican can stop it from happening, whether their modern agents possess the resources and ruthlessness necessary to suppress a revelation that could fundamentally change how humanity understands its own history and potential. Because if this knowledge becomes widely available, if people learn the truth about what's been hidden from them for so long, it won't just challenge religious authority, it will spark a revolution in human consciousness that makes the Renaissance look like a minor historical footnote. The race is on. Ancient secrets versus modern surveillance. Templar ingenuity versus Vatican determination. The truth that wants to be free against the power that profits from ignorance. And somewhere in the shadows of modern Rome, in chambers so secret that their existence isn't officially acknowledged, church officials are making desperate plans to ensure that their 1,000-year conspiracy doesn't unravel in our lifetime. The pressure is building to almost unbearable levels. Because what I'm about to reveal next will show you just how close we are to the moment everything changes. How close the Vatican's carefully constructed walls of secrecy are to crumbling completely. In 2019, something extraordinary happened that barely registered in mainstream news. A team of Italian archaeologists working near Rome discovered what they initially thought was just another ancient Roman villa. Standard procedure, routine excavation, nothing to get excited about. But when they reached the deepest levels of the dig, they found something that made them immediately contact the Vatican. Not the local authorities, not the Italian government, the Vatican. Within hours, church officials had cordoned off the entire site. The archaeological team was disbanded, their findings confiscated, and a wall of silence descended over the discovery. But here's what makes this incident so significant. One of those archaeologists managed to photograph what they found before the Vatican seized everything. Ancient stone tablets covered in symbols that match perfectly with Templar iconography from medieval churches across Europe. The same geometric patterns, the same astronomical alignments, the same coded messages that researchers have been trying to decode for centuries. But these tablets were older, much older, dating back to the 1st century of the Christian era. The ancient stones had spoken, and their message was unmistakable. The Templars hadn't created their secret knowledge. They had simply rediscovered it, preserved it, and passed it forward through 7 centuries of shadow and silence. And now, as digital technology tears down the walls that once protected Vatican secrets, we stand at the threshold of the greatest revelation in human history. The truth isn't buried in some dusty archive anymore. It's flowing through fiber optic cables, spreading across global networks, assembling itself fragment by fragment in the minds of ordinary people who refuse to accept the official story. The Vatican's 1,000-year conspiracy is finally unraveling, and there's nothing they can do to stop it, because the real secret was never about hidden documents or lost artifacts. It was about you. About your right to know the truth about your own history, your own potential, your own connection to knowledge that's been stolen from humanity for over a millennium. The Templars are gone, but their legacy lives on. Not in stone chapels or coded symbols, but in every person who questions authority, who seeks truth beyond official narratives, who refuses to accept ignorance as divine will. The race between ancient secrets and modern revelation is nearly over. And for the first time in 7 centuries, truth is winning.